Hello? There we go. All right, we are going to get started here. It is 9 o'clock, so we're going to start the program now. I'm going to start off with a 10-minute talk once again. So here we go. The tennis great Arthur Ashe once said, "True heroism is remarkably sober, very undramatic. It is not the urge to surpass all others at whatever cost, but the urge to serve others at whatever cost. Every man carved upon this mountain at one point has put the good of his people or the good of his country above himself." Starting with George Washington. George Washington never aspired to lead the Continental Army during the Revolutionary War. He was put into the position due to the respect that the people had for him and his military background. Unfortunately for Washington and the Continental Army, the Revolutionary War did not start off well for them. By 1776, they had lost several battles and never really had any type of decisive victory. By the winter of the same year, they were coming off another loss in New York. With morale low and supplies dwindling, Washington knew that his men needed a victory. This led him to make a bold and heroic decision. He chose to cross the icy waters of the Delaware River in order to surprise the British troops and hopefully secure a victory. Now Washington and his men, they gathered into their boats and they set sail in the dead of night, accompanied by piercing winds, heavy snowfall, and almost no visibility. But by dawn, they had made it across, and with incredible bravery and the element of surprise on their side, they overtook the British troops and they secured their first major victory. On that cold night, George Washington put the needs of his men above his own. He inspired them, and he continues to inspire us today. Now, George Washington was not the only man risking his life for the betterment of the country during this time period. So was Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson risked his life by writing our founding document, the United States Constitution. The British knew the power of Jefferson's words. They knew the strength of his leadership. They knew just how much this country needed him. So they sent troops to capture him at his home in Virginia. Jefferson and the Virginia legislature had fled from Richmond. They went to Jefferson's home. Now, during this time period, not a lot of fighting had taken place in Virginia. The American troops were dispersed, and this left Jefferson and the legislature defenseless. While the British were on their way there, a man named Jack Jewett noticed them, and he suspected that they were on their way to Jefferson's house to capture him. Now Jewett, what he did was he mounted his horse and he rode through the entire night in order to warn Jefferson that the British were on their way. This warning gave Jefferson just enough time to gather his things, mount his horse, and make his escape. Luckily for us, Jefferson did escape that night because he went on to become our third president, where he continued to dedicate his life to the betterment of the country. Now, Jefferson may have dedicated his life to the country, but the next president gave his life for the country. Abraham Lincoln once said, "Let's have faith that right makes might, and in that faith, let us, to the end, dare to do our duty as we understand it." It was Lincoln's unwavering confidence in the idea that he was making the right decisions for the betterment of the country that allowed him to guide us through the Civil War. Even after terrible losses, like the Battle of Chickamauga, where the Union over 2 days lost 16,000 soldiers, Lincoln's beliefs were held steadfast. This confidence in his moral compass not only let him guide us through the Civil War, but it also allowed him to issue the Emancipation Proclamation and the 13th Amendment and end the injustice of slavery. Abraham Lincoln did his duty to the best that he understood. He fought to protect all of our inalienable rights, and he gave up his life in order to do it. Now, while Lincoln fought for the preservation of the Union, it was Theodore Roosevelt that fought for conservation of America's wildlands. Theodore Roosevelt, he was a caring man. He was passionate. he had a fierce connection to nature. It played a large role in his daily life. It was nature that helped shape him into the man that would lead our country. Now, Roosevelt not only wanted people of his generation to be able to have that connection with nature, but he wanted future generations to have that opportunity as well. Now, Roosevelt, he was a man of action, so he quickly put 230 million acres of public lands into federal protection. It was Roosevelt's forethought and compassion that allows us to be here tonight, to connect with this memorial and to connect with each other as Americans. Now, like the men on this mountain, we can all be heroes. And each one of us is a hero or a role model to someone else. So let's take the extra time out of our day to hold the door for someone, even if we're in a rush, to let the people that we care about know that we care for them. Let's put someone else's needs above our own. And by doing that, we can carry the values of the men on this mountain into the future.
States of America. It's hard to imagine, but not long ago, this great land of ours was pure wilderness. A place where millions of bison roamed freely throughout the plains. And those who lived off the land revered it as sacred ground. Yet this country would face a dramatic change, quickly becoming the most advanced nation in the world, in technology, in peace, and in power. From its inception, the United States has shaped itself under the guidance of strong leaders. Leaders who have taken risks, stood up to adversity, and never let go of their vision for a better country. Mount Rushmore reminds us of them, and the countless Americans who have made great sacrifices to ensure the lasting legacy of our country. Freedom. We strived for it, we died for it, we live for it. The year was 1923. The place, the Black Hills of South Dakota. State historian Don Robinson proposed that these granite outcroppings could be the site of an enormous monument dedicated to the heroes of the West, such as Lewis and Clark and Chief Red Cloud. But commissioned sculptor Gutzon Borglum had a different concept in mind. Borglum was a passionately patriotic man. and believed that a more fitting tribute should honor the American experience. A memorial that would represent our ideals, our dreams, and our accomplishments as a country. A memorial that would convey a spirit of patriotism. Borglum chose his canvas carefully, the giant granite rock face of Mount Rushmore. And in 1927, work on the mountain began. Borglum assembled a team of local miners, ranchers, and lumbermen to help with construction. The sculptor built a model of the president sent to serve as a guide. Every inch of the model represented 1 foot on the mountain. Year after year, Borglum and his crew hung tirelessly up the side of the mountain, drilling and blasting their way to reach granite solid enough for carving. It took 14 years and nearly $1 million to complete the 4 60-foot faces. And even though the sculptor did not live to see the very final touches put into place, he was able to carry out his vision. 4 great Americans immortalized in stone, symbolizing the democratic society in which we live, the struggle for our independence, the fight for our freedom, and the sacrifices we have made since our country began more than 200 years ago. It was a time of rebellion and of war. It began as an uprising against British rule and turned into a full-fledged crusade for personal freedom and national independence. The American Revolution. From 1775 to 1783, up to 250,000 patriots engaged in battle. Even during the toughest times, when the Continental Army seemed undisciplined and ill-equipped, one man's courage and determination ultimately led the troops to victory over the British. The future father of our country, George Washington. Born and raised in colonial Virginia, George Washington grew up to be a firm believer in American independence. Even though his heart yearned for quiet family life at his Mount Vernon home, his deep commitment to the Republic made him answer the call of his country time and time again. As general, Washington became an instant hero throughout the colonies. The public was so enamored with him that many people wished that he become king. But Washington scoffed at such an idea.
The army must serve the country, but not rule it. Express your utmost horror and detestation of the man who wishes to overturn the liberties of our country. George Washington, 1783.
It was this kind of insight and integrity that made him the perfect person to oversee the creation of a new federal government. With no blueprint to follow, Washington kept the colonies united and on course during the infant years of this nation. And after ratification of the Constitution, when he was unanimously elected first President of the United States, Washington was keenly aware that he was laying down the framework for future presidents to follow. Washington's legacy is that of a man who was first in war, first in peace, and first in the hearts of his countrymen. In his inaugural address, he spoke of the task that lay before this new nation.
The preservation of the sacred fire of liberty and the destiny of the Republican model of government are justly considered as deeply, perhaps as finally stake, on the experiment entrusted to the hands of the American people. George Washington, 1789.
George Washington welded this union, but it would take another great visionary to expand it. Thomas Jefferson, third President of the United States.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Thomas Jefferson, 1776.
Thomas Jefferson was the voice of the American people, inspiring patriots with his carefully crafted words written in the Declaration of Independence, the document that gave birth to our nation. It was also Jefferson who fought for religious freedom and the democratic notion that people should have a say in government, two very American principles we cherish today. Thomas Jefferson always thought of himself more as a scientist or scholar than as a politician. And it was this quest for knowledge that played a role in the greatest achievement of his presidency. In 1803, Jefferson acquired the French lands west of the Mississippi in the Louisiana Purchase, which doubled the size of the country. In an effort to find out what America now owned, Jefferson sent Meriwether Lewis and William Clark on their famous expedition out west. It was an exciting time of discovery for new Americans. However, what was good for a growing nation was not necessarily good for its original inhabitants. During this time of expansion, many Native Americans were uprooted from their homes and hunting grounds and pushed farther west. But during an address to a group of Cherokee chiefs, Jefferson prophesied about future relations between natives and new settlers.
I shall rejoice to see the day when the red men, our neighbors, become truly one people with us, enjoying all the rights and privileges we do, and living in peace and plenty as we do, without anyone to make them afraid, to injure their persons, or to take their property, without being punished for it according to fixed laws. Thomas Jefferson, 1808.
Jefferson's dream was slow to be realized as conflicts between the U.S. government and Native Americans set off a chain of events that dramatically reduced Native populations throughout the 19th century. Thomas Jefferson believed in the promise of America and had faith in the American people. But this faith would truly be tested nearly 60 years later, when the Republic came dangerously close to unraveling. The Civil War was the most tumultuous period in American history. The differences between the states had deeply divided a nation, pitting brother against brother on American soil. But it was the determination of one man to keep the United States united. Abraham Lincoln, our 16th president. Abraham Lincoln was a self-made man of great character, a frontiersman who came from humble beginnings. When Lincoln was inaugurated in 1861, he faced more adversity than any other president in U.S. history. Many southern states had withdrawn from the Union. And even though Lincoln opposed war, he warned the South in his inaugural address that he would take whatever measures necessary to stop the rebellion.
In your hands, my dissatisfied fellow countrymen, and not in mine, is the momentous issue of civil war. The government will not assail you. You have no oath registered in heaven to destroy the government, while I shall have the most solemn one, to preserve, protect, and defend it. Abraham Lincoln, 1861.
The Civil War raged on for 4 brutal years. But Lincoln stuck to his commitment to democracy. His main objective was to save the Union, and he also strongly believed in freedom for all Americans. Until slavery was abolished, Lincoln felt the U.S. could never truly be the home of the free. Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation began the process that ended the evils of slavery forever. Over 500,000 Union and Confederate soldiers lost their lives in the Civil War. But during his famous Gettysburg Address, Lincoln reminded the American people what this war was really all about.
That we here highly resolve that these dead should not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that this government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. Abraham Lincoln, 1863.
Over the next 50 years, the United States would go through a dramatic transformation. The year 1900 was coming around the bend, and America was turning from a rural republic to a budding industrial power. It was clear that this new century, which burst with hope, needed a fresh start and a fresh approach. It was Theodore Roosevelt, our 26th president, who led the way.
Is America a weakling? To shrink from the work of the great world powers? No! The young giant of the West stands on a continent and clasps the crest of an ocean in either hand. Our nation, glorious in youth and strength, looks into the future with eager eyes and rejoices as a strong man's run a race. Theodore Roosevelt, 1897.
He was energetic, he was robust, and he was eager to show the world that America was a force to be reckoned with. Theodore Roosevelt believed in the strenuous life. Frail and sickly as a young boy, he overcame his illnesses and grew up to be a naturalist, a cowboy, a war hero, an author, and President of the United States by the young age of 42. His vigorous outlook on life transferred to the Oval Office. Roosevelt was a man of action. He promoted economic freedom and was a friend to the working class, protecting their rights against big business and what he called the criminal rich. Roosevelt also expanded the country's power abroad. It was his support of the 1903 revolution in Panama that led the U.S. to acquire territory for the construction of the Panama Canal. This massive undertaking not only created a valuable link between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, but it put the United States on the map in world politics. Yet, Roosevelt may be known best for his passion for the outdoors. He was vocal about conservation, and through the power of his presidency, he provided federal protection for almost 230 million acres of land.
To waste, to destroy our natural resources, to skin and exhaust the land instead of using it so as to increase its usefulness, will result in undermining in the days of our children the very prosperity which we ought by right to hand down to them amplified and developed. Theodore Roosevelt, 1907.
The pursuit of the American dream did not end with Theodore Roosevelt's term. Instead, it has carried us into the 21st century. Throughout history, countless Americans have made great sacrifices so that we can enjoy the freedoms of this land.
Country can do for you.
The same freedoms guaranteed in our Constitution and Bill of Rights. The same freedoms millions of people have sought since the first immigrants arrived over 200 years ago. Gutzon Borglum reminds us of this with his timeless memorial. 4 Americans representing the birth, growth, preservation, and development of this country. All embodying the spirit of our nation. All advocates of freedom, dignity, and the ideals of American life. Ladies and gentlemen, please rise and join in singing America's national anthem.
Oh, say can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the sight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly
No, not here.
Ladies and gentlemen of the audience, to conclude our ceremony, most of these men and women have never met each other, and yet tonight they are bonded together on this stage. For most, this is the only public recognition they will ever receive for their willingness to serve. As they rejoin their families, let's show them how we feel about them with another round of heartfelt applause.